We stand today at a perilous juncture in the history of human development, defined by a terrifying asymmetry between our capacity to manipulate the physical world and our ability to govern that power through coherent, constructive thought. In the span of a few generations, humanity has unlocked secrets of nature that have granted us dominance over our environment, yet we remain dangerously inept at the task of organizing our own societies or preventing our own destruction. We have constructed engines of immense force and developed chemical agents of lethal efficiency, yet when the leaders of nations gather to secure peace, they appear as helpless as tribal chieftains, drifting toward catastrophe not by design but by a paralysis of collective intelligence. This failure of the mind to keep pace with the hand is not merely a political or diplomatic inconvenience. It is a fundamental crisis of civilization that threatens to plunge us into a new dark age. The urgency of this situation demands that we turn our attention inward, to the very instrument by which we navigate existence, the human mind itself. It is evident that our current methods of using this instrument are inadequate to the complexity of the problems we have created. In every field, from the ordering of international relations to the management of industrial economies, and even within the private spheres of art and ethics, we see a surplus of critical energy but a deficit of creative direction. We dismantle old traditions with ease, yet we falter when the moment arrives to build stable new forms. If we are to survive the environment we have engineered, we must achieve a mastery over our intellectual processes comparable to the mastery we have achieved over material nature. We require, in short, a deliberate and sophisticated art of thought. However, when we look for guidance in cultivating this art, we confront a significant obstacle in the current state of knowledge. In many practical crafts, the empirical skills of the practitioner run far ahead of the scientific principles that explain them. A chef may produce a masterpiece of nutrition and flavor by following traditional rules of thumb long before chemistry can explain the molecular dynamics of the sauce. Similarly, the thinker has largely been left to fumble with empirical discoveries, picking up tricks of the trade from masters or stumbling upon them by accident, while the science of the mind, psychology, lags behind. Indeed, a young intellectual seeking to improve their mental efficiency today might find that the available psychological textbooks offer little practical utility. They may describe the mechanism of the senses or the speed of reaction times, but when the student asks how to generate a new hypothesis or how to bring a vague intuition to clarity, the science falls silent. This silence is not merely a gap in data. It is the result of a fundamental misconception that has dominated recent psychological and physiological theory. We have been led astray by a metaphor that appeals to an age of industrial machinery but falsifies the nature of life, the conception of the human organism as a machine driven by a separate fuel. In this mechanist view, the intellect is portrayed as a passive engine, an inert apparatus of gears and levers that possesses no energy of its own. The driving force, the steam that sets this machine in motion, is assumed to be the crude power of biological instinct, fear, hunger, or sex. According to this doctrine, reason can steer the vehicle, but it cannot move it. The mind is a slave to the passions, capable only of finding means to ends dictated by blind biological urges. The implications of this view for the thinker are paralyzing. If the intellect is merely a steering wheel turned by the energy of primitive instincts, then the hope of a disciplined, creative life is an illusion. We are reduced to biological automatons, rationalizing our animal impulses with high-sounding logic. This perspective has even been weaponized by certain political ideologies to justify the suppression of independent thought, arguing that since all reasoning is merely the disguised expression of class interest or biological need, the only valid political strategy is the imposition of will by a determined minority. If we accept this mechanist model, the art of thought becomes impossible, for there is no independent agent to practice it. To escape this trap and define the problem of thought correctly, we must adopt a more biological, less mechanical conception of the human being. We must view the organism not as a steam engine, but as a federation of living elements. In this hormic view, derived from the Greek concept of vital drive or urge, the individual is an imperfectly integrated society of cells and organs, each possessing a certain degree of autonomy and its own specific energy. The white blood cells that patrol our veins to fight infection are not passive tools. They behave with a kind of independent life, hunting intruders in a way that serves the whole but retains a trace of separate existence. The nervous system, too, is a hierarchy of structures evolved over millions of years, where older, simpler reflexes coexist with the newer, more complex functions of the cerebral cortex. In this light, the intellect is not a lifeless machine waiting for a kick from the lower instincts. The brain itself has a drive. It has a biological need to function, to explore, to arrange, and to solve. A child does not need the spur of hunger or fear to solve a puzzle. The activity of the brain is its own reward. The problem of the thinker, then, is not how to fuel a dead machine with passion, but how to coordinate the conflicting energies of a living, complex organism. The human being is not a unity by default. We are a collection of forces, instincts, habits, conscious resolutions, and subconscious currents that tend toward integration but never fully achieve it. The art of thought is the attempt to impose a higher degree of order upon this teeming, semi-independent internal population, to align the hormic energy of the whole toward a conscious purpose. This brings us to the second major dimension of the problem, the nature of the consciousness we intend to use and control. Common sense tells us that we are single, unified selves, operating with full awareness and a monolithic will. We wake up, we decide to act, and we act. But if we are to improve our thinking, we must dismantle this comforting illusion. Consciousness is not a simple on-off switch, it is a graded spectrum. It ranges from the sharp, focused glare of immediate attention to the twilight zones of half-awareness, and down into the profound darkness of the unconscious. At any given moment, the mental events we are aware of are only a fraction of the total activity occurring within the brain. Furthermore, our will, the faculty we rely on to direct our thoughts, is equally fragmented and limited in its reach. We have relatively complete control over our voluntary muscles. We can decide to pick up a pen or turn a page, and the hand obeys instantly. We can, with some effort, direct the focus of our eyes and our attention. But we cannot directly command our emotions or our higher intellectual processes. We cannot, by a sheer act of will, force ourselves to feel joy at a funeral or misery at a wedding. Nor can we order the mind to produce a brilliant idea. We can sit at a desk and decide to work, but we cannot decide to be a genius. The most vital events in the production of a new thought, the sudden flash of insight, the intuitive leap, the crystallization of a concept, occur outside the direct jurisdiction of the will. They happen to us, rather than being done by us. This limitation explains why so many manuals on how to think are futile. They prescribe logical rules for a process that fundamentally resists direct coercion. If the most important stages of creative thought are involuntary, how can there be an art of thought? We are faced with the paradox of trying to control the uncontrollable. The problem of the thinker is that they must pilot a vessel that often refuses to answer the helm. They must learn to influence their own mental processes indirectly, managing the conditions under which thoughts arise rather than manufacturing the thoughts themselves. We are like gardeners who can prepare the soil and plant the seed, but who cannot mechanically force the flower to bloom. To understand what we are trying to cultivate, we must examine the natural behavior of the mind before it is subjected to the discipline of art. If we strip away the habits acquired through education and civilization, a difficult task, for we are creatures of habit, we find that the mind's baseline activity is the association of ideas. This is the automatic linking of one mental image or concept to another, a stream of consciousness that flows according to its own obscure laws. In its rawest form, this process is not logical deduction, it is a chaotic drift. A sensation triggers a memory, which sparks an emotion, which retrieves a word, which summons an image. Aristotle observed this associative chain, noting that items are linked by similarity, contrast, or proximity in time and space. This associative drift is the raw material of all creativity. Without it, the mind would be a static archive of facts. But left to itself, it is aimless. We can see this mechanism most clearly when the discipline of the will is relaxed, in daydreams, in the moments before sleep, or in the unguarded reveries of a long journey. In these states, the mind wanders, throwing up a relentless succession of fantasies, memories, and what-if scenarios. This is the brain practicing its own form of trial and error. Just as a rat in a maze will physically try different paths until it finds the exit, the mind in a state of reverie continuously constructs hypothetical situations and tests potential solutions against the memory of experience. The psychological record of such daydreams reveals a fascinating interplay between the rising and falling of consciousness. As the mind grapples with a problem, perhaps a social anxiety or a professional hurdle, ideas bubble up from the unconscious. Some are rejected immediately by a flash of judgment. Others are entertained, elaborated, and developed into internal dramas or dialogues. We see here a natural, primitive form of reasoning, where the hormic drive of the organism seeks equilibrium. A worry triggers a search for a solution. The mind throws up a possibility. The critical faculty objects. The mind tries another path. This dialogue continues until a solution produces a feeling of satisfaction, a click of recognition, or until the thinker drifts into sleep. The problem, however, is that this natural process is terribly inefficient for the demands of high-level intellectual work. The associative stream is easily diverted. A chance word in a book, a sudden noise, or a pang of physical discomfort can derail a train of thought that was moving toward a valuable conclusion. Moreover, the quality of the associations degrades as the level of energy or consciousness drops. In a state of fatigue or drowsiness, the mind accepts absurd connections that it would reject when fully alert. We have all experienced the bizarre logic of dreams or the nonsensical profoundness of a thought that comes just as we are falling asleep, only to be revealed as gibberish in the morning light. Furthermore, the natural association of ideas is often driven by emotional complexes that have nothing to do with the truth we are seeking. A scientist trying to analyze a set of data may find their thoughts constantly hijacked by professional jealousy, fear of failure, or the irritation of a domestic dispute. The drive that pushes the association chain forward is often not the pure desire for truth, but a primitive emotional urge seeking relief. If we are to think effectively, we must find a way to harness this associative power without being enslaved by it. We must preserve the fertility of the natural mind while imposing the rigor of the critical will. This brings us to the central structural problem of the thinking life, the management of time and the sequence of mental operations. Thinking is not a single, uniform act. It is a process that unfolds over time and requires different behaviors at different stages. A common failure among those who strive to use their minds is the attempt to perform all the operations of thought simultaneously or in the wrong order. We try to be creative and critical at the same moment. We try to force a conclusion when the mind has not yet digested the evidence. We keep pushing the engine when it has overheated, or we let it idle when it should be driving forward. If we examine the testimony of men and women who have achieved great intellectual results, poets, mathematicians, scientists, we find that a successful thought process typically divides itself into distinct phases. These phases are not arbitrary inventions. They are dictated by the natural rhythm of the human organism. There is a period of conscious labor, a period of apparent idleness, a sudden moment of breakthrough, and a final period of checking and refining. The tragedy of many potential thinkers is that they never learn to recognize or respect these stages. They are like athletes who do not know the difference between training, resting, and racing, and who consequently exhaust themselves without ever reaching their peak performance. The first phase of this sequence is the stage of preparation. This is the phase of hard, conscious, and often unromantic labor. It involves the accumulation of facts, the definition of the problem, and the deliberate setting of the problem attitude. Here, the thinker is very much in the driver's seat. We can decide to read a book, to conduct an experiment, to mathematically analyze a set of figures. This is the domain of the school and the university, the region of intellectual life where standard educational methods are most effective. We can be taught how to gather data and how to apply the known rules of logic. But preparation alone does not produce the new idea. We have all had the experience of staring at a problem for hours, rearranging the data, trying every logical permutation, and arriving nowhere. The mind feels blocked, the imagination sterile. It is at this point of impasse that the unskilled thinker often forces the issue, grinding away in a state of deepening fatigue and frustration, producing work that is wooden and lifeless. This is the error of treating the mind as a machine that simply needs more pressure to produce more output. The biological reality is that the brain often requires a period of cessation from conscious effort on the specific problem at hand. This is the stage of incubation. It is a phase of negative voluntary behavior. We must deliberately stop thinking about the one thing we want to solve. This is not merely rest. It is a functional part of the thought process. During this interval, while the conscious self is occupied with other tasks or dissolved in relaxation, the deeper, unconscious machinery of the mind continues to work. It explores the associations that were blocked by the rigid focus of the conscious will. It allows the problem to soak in the vast reservoir of memory and experience. The failure to allow for incubation is a pervasive flaw in modern life. Our educational systems and our professional cultures are obsessed with visible, continuous activity. We are taught that idleness is a vice, that time spent staring out of a window or walking in the woods is time wasted. We fill every gap in the day with reading, talking, or structured entertainment. In doing so, we choke the very roots of creative thought. We prevent the unconscious mind from performing its vital sorting and synthesizing work. An administrator who is proud of never leaving their desk, or a student who studies until their eyes blur, is often actively preventing the arrival of the solution they seek. They are interfering with the hormic process of their own organism, mistaking busyness for efficiency. If the conditions are right, the period of incubation leads to the third and most mysterious stage, illumination. This is the click, the flash, the sudden arrival of the answer. It often happens when it is least expected, during a walk, in the bath, or upon waking in the morning. The solution presents itself to consciousness, sometimes fully formed, sometimes as a vague but powerful intimation that the right path has been found. This moment is the crux of creative thought, the point where the physiological and psychological currents converge to produce a new pattern. But illumination is not the end. The idea that arrives in a flash is not guaranteed to be true. It is merely a candidate for truth. It must be subjected to the rigorous discipline of verification. The thinker must step back into the role of the conscious critic, testing the new idea against the facts, checking the calculations, refining the expression. Here again, the will resumes control. The danger at this stage is the seduction of the beautiful idea. The flash of insight is often accompanied by a strong emotional sense of certainty, a feeling of aesthetic rightness. But nature cares nothing for our feelings of certainty. A theory may be elegant and emotionally satisfying, yet completely wrong. The thinker must possess the intellectual integrity to reject the fruit of their own unconscious creation if it fails the test of reality. The problem we face, therefore, is one of delicate management. We are attempting to direct a complex, semi-autonomous organism that operates partly in the light of consciousness and partly in the dark. We must be able to switch between different modes of mental behavior, now the rigorous taskmaster driving the brain to absorb facts, now the passive observer waiting for a sign, now the severe judge condemning a cherished theory. We must learn to use our will not to crush our instincts, but to guide them, not to force the mind, but to set the conditions in which the mind can act according to its own deep laws. This is not a skill that comes naturally to us. In the ancestral environment where our brains evolved, the cycle of stimulus and response was short. A danger appeared, and we acted. Hunger arose, and we hunted. We are not biologically adapted for the sustained, abstract, and often lonely process of solving problems that may take years to crack. We are trying to use a Stone Age instrument for the purposes of a scientific civilization. The friction between our biological nature and our intellectual ambitions is the source of our distress. We are weary, anxious, and inefficient because we are fighting against the grain of our own constitution. The problem, then, is multifaceted. It is the societal imperative to think better in order to survive. It is the theoretical error of viewing the mind as a passive machine. It is the structural limitation of a conscious will that cannot directly command the creative faculties. And it is the practical difficulty of orchestrating the natural, messy, and rhythmic processes of the brain into a coherent sequence of production. We possess a magnificent instrument, but we do not possess the manual. We have the power, but we lack the art. To bridge this gap, we must look deeper into the causes of our mental successes and failures, examining the hidden machinery of the mind not as we wish it to be, but as it actually is. Before we move on, please subscribe to our channel, Deep Thinker, and hit that like button if you enjoy self-improvement content. Also, don't forget to share this with your friends and family. Alright, let's get back to it. If the problem of the thinker is the challenge of navigating a vessel that often refuses to answer the helm, we must now descend into the engine room to understand the mechanics of that refusal. It is not enough to simply label the stages of thought, preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification, as if they were stations on a railway line. We must analyze the causal dynamics that drive the movement from one stage to the next, and identify the specific psychological and physiological forces that so often cause the train to derail. The failure of our intellectual control is caused not by a lack of will, but by a profound misalignment between our conscious efforts and the subtle, often subterranean reality of how the mind actually produces new configurations of ideas. The core of this causal machinery lies in the relationship between the conscious will and the associative process. We have seen that the creative breakthrough, the illumination, cannot be compelled. However, the absence of direct control does not imply an absence of causation. The flash of insight is not a random accident. It is the culmination of a sequence of psychological events, most of which occur below the threshold of our immediate awareness. To understand the cause of our intellectual successes and failures, we must probe the obscure interval that lies between the conscious labor of preparation and the sudden arrival of the solution. When we abandon the direct effort of preparation and enter the phase of incubation, we are not merely switching off the engine, we are handing over the work to a different department of the organism. The evidence suggests that during this period of apparent rest, the brain does not cease to function. On the contrary, it engages in a process of unconscious exploration. Released from the rigid focus of the voluntary attention, the associative machinery of the mind begins to form new combinations of the data we have fed it. It is as if the files we painstakingly collected and labeled during preparation are now being shuffled and cross-referenced by a silent, invisible clerk. The effectiveness of this unconscious work depends heavily on the nature of the interference we permit during the interval. If we fill the incubation period with a constant stream of passive distractions, reading newspapers, engaging in trivial conversation, or worrying about unrelated matters, we disrupt the delicate associative currents. We introduce noise into the system. The cause of much intellectual sterility is simply the failure to provide the unconscious mind with the protected silence it requires to perform its sorting operations. We fear the vacuum of idleness, not realizing that it is within this vacuum that the pressure of the new idea builds up. But the most critical and elusive causal factor in the production of thought is the phenomenon that links the unconscious work to the conscious breakthrough. There exists a transitional state, a fringe of consciousness, which alerts us that a solution is imminent. We may call this the state of intimation. It is a faint, often wordless signal from the periphery of the mind, warning the thinker that the association train is approaching a significant junction. It manifests as a vague feeling of warmth, a sense of a rising pattern, or an inexplicable confidence that the answer is near, even though the answer itself is not yet visible. The mismanagement of this delicate state of intimation is a primary cause of abortive thinking. The sensation is often subtle and easily ignored. In the clamor of modern life, or under the pressure of a deadline, the thinker is liable to brush aside this faint nudge from the unconscious. We are trained to value clear, articulate concepts. We are suspicious of vague feelings. Yet, this fringe consciousness is the very birthplace of the new idea. If we attempt to drag the idea into the full glare of focal consciousness too abruptly, we may sever the associative link. We are like a fisherman who jerks the line too violently at the first nibble, scaring the fish away. Conversely, if we are too passive, the intimation may fade back into the darkness, the association unraveling before it can be captured in words. The art of thought, at this causal level, requires a specific and difficult act of will. The will to hold the mind still, to maintain a state of expectant receptivity, to look out of the corner of the eye without turning the head. We must learn to recognize the emotional color of the intimation, whether it signals a mathematical solution, a poetic image, or a practical decision, and to gently encourage its development until it crystallizes into the illumination. The failure to master this subtle stroke of mental behavior is responsible for the loss of countless potential discoveries. This reliance on feeling as a guide to thought forces us to reconsider the role of emotion in the intellectual economy. We have been conditioned by the mechanist tradition to view emotion as a contaminant, a source of bias that must be purged from the laboratory of the mind. And indeed, raw, unexamined passion is a frequent cause of error. But the hormic view of the organism reveals that emotion is also the fuel and the compass of the thinking process. The drive to solve a problem is itself an emotional drive. Without the affect of curiosity, or the desire for order, the intellect would remain inert. Moreover, specific emotions act as sophisticated cognitive tools. The feeling of significance is a crucial diagnostic signal. A poet or a scientist may be struck by a mundane fact, a falling apple, a field of daffodils, not because of its logical utility, but because it suddenly feels burdened with meaning. This feeling is the organism's way of flagging a potential connection between the specific instance and a universal law. It is a recognition of likeness that precedes the logical proof of likeness. If we repress this emotional signal in the name of a sterile rationality, we cut ourselves off from the primary source of hypothesis. Similarly, the sense of humor is a potent intellectual solvent. The sudden perception of the ridiculous is often the mind's reaction to the breaking of a rigid mental habit or the exposure of a false solemnity. It is a release of tension that accompanies a shift in perspective. A thinker who suppresses their sense of humor creates a causal block in their own mind. They become unable to see the absurdity of a cherished dogma and thus lose the capacity to correct their course. The ability to laugh at one's own theories is not a diversion from serious thought. It is a mechanism of verification, a way of testing the structural integrity of an idea by subjecting it to the vibration of mockery. However, the integration of emotion and reason is fraught with danger. If the emotion remains primitive, mere anger, fear, or lust, it will hijack the associative machinery for its own ends. The mind will then function not as an instrument of discovery, but as a factory for rationalizations. We see this pathology clearly in the mechanist political creeds that elevate class hatred or racial pride to the status of scientific principles. In these cases, the intellect is indeed degraded to the status of a slave to the passions. The cause of the intellectual failure here is not the presence of emotion, but the failure to sublimate the raw instinct into a stable sentiment, a complex organization of feeling and thought centered on a high object, such as truth or justice. The causal landscape of thought is further complicated by the operation of habit. Every mental act we perform leaves a trace in the nervous system, facilitating the repetition of that act. This is a double-edged sword. On one hand, the formation of right habits is the only way to economize mental energy. We cannot rediscover the rules of logic or the vocabulary of our language every morning. We must rely on the automatic machinery of habit to handle the routine operations of the mind, freeing the conscious will for the work of creation. The ability to warm up quickly, to respond to the stimulus of a specific time and place with a surge of intellectual focus, is a habit that differentiates the professional thinker from the amateur. On the other hand, habit is the great enemy of freshness. The mind has a fatal tendency to run in grooves. Once a track of association has been worn smooth, the thoughts slide along it with effortless speed, bypassing the friction of reality. We mistake this ease of movement for the energy of truth. A philosopher may spend a lifetime elaborating a system that is nothing more than the habitual reiteration of a few early prejudices. The sensation of difficulty is removed, but so is the contact with the world. The cause of much stagnant thinking is the failure to interrupt one's own routines, to deliberately break the mold of habit in order to force the mind into new and difficult country. The thinker must maintain a perpetual tension between the economy of habit and the necessity of shock. This tension brings us to the question of energy. We often confuse energy with effort. We imagine that we are thinking hard only when we are conscious of strain, when the brow is furrowed and the will is clenched. But the highest creative work is often accompanied by a sensation of flow, of a power that seems to carry the thinker along. This is not the absence of energy, it is the presence of energy so perfectly coordinated that it encounters no internal resistance. The stroke of the thinker, like the stroke of the oarsman, should deliver maximum power with minimum turbulence. The cause of low intellectual output is often the waste of energy and internal friction. The thinker who is torn by conflicting impulses, whose body is tense with anxiety, or who tries to force the mind to work against its natural grain, dissipates their power in heat rather than light. We see this in the agonized thinker who mistakes self-torture for profundity. Conversely, there is the danger of the relaxed thinker who, in seeking to avoid strain, collapses into a flabby passivity. The true cause of effective thought is the achievement of a dynamic harmony, a state where the hormic drive of the entire organism, body, emotions, and intellect, is unified in a single direction. This unity is often best achieved not by repose, but by action. The act of writing, of speaking, or of making a decision can serve as a crystallizing force, snapping the disparate elements of the self into alignment and releasing a surge of energy that was previously dammed up by indecision. Our diagnosis of the causes of successful or failed thought cannot remain confined to the individual psychology. We must recognize that thinking is also a social activity, shaped by the traditions and habits of the group. Just as an individual develops a characteristic style of association, so too do nations and professions develop collective mental habits that act as powerful causal factors in their history. These types of thought function as invisible constraints, determining which solutions are conceivable and which are ruled out a priori. we can observe a striking divergence, for instance, in the intellectual habits of the English and the French. The English political mind has historically cultivated a reliance on the unconscious, a habit of muddling through. This is not merely a lack of planning. It is a semi-conscious strategy of waiting for the situation to mature, of trusting the intuitive feel of the moment rather than the rigors of abstract logic. The cause of English success in adaptation has been this willingness to allow the hormic response to a situation to develop in the dark before bringing it to the light of legislation. It allows for a flexibility that logic often denies. However, the cause of the corresponding English vice, perfidy, or the appearance of hypocrisy, lies in this same habit. A statesman who waits on his intuition may promise one thing today and do another tomorrow, not because he is a liar, but because his feeling about the situation has shifted. He has no rigid logical framework to anchor his consistency. He bewilders his neighbors because he cannot explain his own actions. The causal chain of his decision-making is hidden even from himself in the fog of his fringe consciousness. In contrast, the French intellectual tradition, hardened by the rationalism of the Revolution and the codification of the law, emphasizes the conscious stages of preparation and verification. It values the clarity of the premise and the rigor of the deduction. The French thinker seeks to bring every factor into the sharp focus of the spotlight. The cause of the clarity and precision of French policy is this relentless application of the conscious will to the ordering of ideas. But the defect of this virtue is a dangerous rigidity. The logical mind is tempted to suppress the inconvenient intimation that contradicts the system. It treats the complex, fluid reality of human life as if it were a geometry problem. In the aftermath of a great conflict, such as the World War, a reliance on pure logic can lead to a policy that is mathematically correct but psychologically disastrous. The refusal to acknowledge the vague, unquantifiable forces of human sentiment, because they cannot be fitted into the syllogism, becomes a cause of tragic errors in statecraft. Across the Atlantic, we see the emergence of yet another type, the pioneer mind of America. Here, the causal driver is a legacy of the frontier, where the immediate mastery of the environment was the supreme necessity. This has produced an intellect of formidable energy and practical efficiency, focused intensely on achievement. But this focus has often come at the expense of the enjoyment of thought for its own sake. The pioneer mind tends to view the slow, non-utilitarian processes of incubation and the subtle signaling of intimation with suspicion. It equates the highbrow, the practitioner of the complex art of thought, with the effete. The cause of the specific limitations in American intellectual life, the tendency toward standardization, the suspicion of eccentricity, the demand for immediate results, can be traced to this historical conditioning. The mental habits that cleared the forests are not necessarily the habits required to navigate the subtleties of a mature civilization. The repression of the useless reverie, the moralization of every intellectual problem, and the fear of social nonconformity act as brakes on the development of the highest forms of creative thought. Finally, we must consider the attempts that have been made to shortcut the difficulties of the thinking process by artificially inducing the state of dissociation. Throughout history, men have sought to bypass the arduous discipline of the will by using trances, hypnotism, or drugs to unlock the resources of the unconscious. The oracle, the medium, and the crystal gazer represent a radical method of solving the problem of thought, the abdication of the conscious self in favor of the automatic mechanism. The evidence suggests that while such dissociation can indeed release a flood of imagery and verbal fluency, it rarely produces work of high intellectual value. The cause of this failure lies in the separation of the productive mechanism from the critical faculty. The hypnotized subject or the dreamer lacks the power of verification. They may produce a stream of associations, but they cannot select the true from the false. The great creative works of history have not been produced by sleepwalkers. They have been produced by men and women who maintained a tension between the fertile chaos of the unconscious and the ordering principle of the will. The voices heard by a Joan of Arc or the daimon of a Socrates were likely vivid manifestations of intimation, but they were successful guides only because they operated within a personality that retained its grip on reality. The cause of our intellectual predicament, therefore, is not a single broken gear. It is a systemic failure to coordinate the diverse functions of the mind. We fail because we do not understand the biology of our own brains. We try to harvest the crop without allowing time for the seed to germinate. We let the weeds of distraction choke the soil. We mistake the rigid tracks of habit for the open road of reason. We allow our tools, our emotions, our routines, our national traditions, to become our masters. We are attempting to solve the equations of the 20th century with the mental arithmetic of the Stone Age, and we are surprised when the answer comes out wrong. The diagnosis is clear. We are using a delicate, rhythmic, and multi-layered instrument as if it were a blunt object. Before we move on, please subscribe to our channel, Deep Thinker, and hit that like button if you enjoy self-improvement content. Also, don't forget to share this with your friends and family. Alright, let's get back to it. The diagnosis of our intellectual condition reveals a paradox. We are attempting to master the complexities of a 20th century civilization with a mental instrument that we neither fully understand nor properly respect. We have treated the mind as a tireless machine, ignored its biological rhythms, and subjected it to educational and social disciplines that stifle its most vital functions. The solution to this crisis, therefore, cannot be a mere collection of minor adjustments or a new set of logical rules. It must be a fundamental reconstruction of how we live the life of the mind, extending from the private discipline of the individual thinker to the public organization of our schools and the professional structure of our society. We must move from a naive reliance on nature or mechanism to a conscious, sophisticated art of thought. For the individual thinker, the solution begins with the deliberate acceptance of the hormic conception of life. We must cease to view ourselves as unified wills driving a passive engine and accept our reality as complex, semi-autonomous organisms. This acceptance brings with it a new responsibility, the management of our own mental ecology. We must become expert observers of our own internal weather, learning to recognize the signs of fatigue, the subtle stirrings of intimation, and the rigidities of habit. The practical application of this art centers on the conscious regulation of the 4 stages of thought. We must learn to perform the act of dissociation without losing control, to switch voluntarily between the intense focus of preparation and the passive receptivity of incubation. This requires a new kind of discipline, one that values silence and apparent idleness as highly as visible labor. The thinker must have the courage to stop working when the conscious effort has reached the point of diminishing returns, trusting the unconscious machinery to continue the task. We must cultivate the saltbox habit of catching the fleeting birds of the fringe consciousness, recording the vague idea, the passing mood, the fringe thought, before they vanish into the abyss of forgetfulness. Furthermore, we must solve the problem of energy by mastering the relationship between habit and stimulus. Habit is the great economizer of effort. Without it, we would be exhausted by the trivial decisions of the morning. We should, therefore, form rigid habits for the mechanical aspects of our work, the time of starting, the arrangement of the desk, the order of papers. But we must remain ruthlessly vigilant against the encroachment of habit upon the creative core of our thinking. The solution is a rhythmic alternation. We use habit to get started, to warm up the brain, but we deliberately break the mold, by travel, by changing our reading, by seeking new social contacts, whenever we detect the onset of staleness. We must maintain a stroke in our thinking, a specific dynamic of effort that applies the maximum energy with the minimum internal friction, avoiding both the agonizing strain of the conflicted will and the flabby drift of the relaxed mind. But the art of thought cannot be perfected by the adult alone. It must be taught. If we are to produce a generation capable of solving the problems we have failed to solve, we must revolutionize our approach to education. The current systems, whether the rigid curricula of the European tradition or the mass education models of the new democracies, are largely designed to produce competent routine workers, not creative thinkers. They focus almost exclusively on the stage of preparation, the accumulation of facts, and the practice of logical verification. They systematically starve the stages of incubation and illumination. The educational solution requires us to navigate a delicate compromise between the nature of the child and the needs of the future adult. We must reject the romantic notion that the child's spontaneous urge is sufficient guide. A child left to wander in a wood does not automatically become a biologist, they become a savage. We must guide the natural curiosity of youth into the disciplined channels of art. But this guidance must not take the form of continuous, crushing supervision. The modern tendency to fill every hour of a student's day with compulsory lessons and compulsory games is a disaster for the potential thinker. It destroys the leisure which is the biological prerequisite for the growth of deep thought. We must restore the experience of silence and solitude to the life of the young. A potential poet or scientist must have time to dream, time to be bored, Time to let the mind follow its own erratic path without the interference of a master or a whistle. Moreover, we must teach the young the psychology of their own minds. Just as we teach them the physiology of the body so they may stay healthy, we should teach them the physiology of thought so they may stay creative. A student who understands that a feeling of confusion is often the prelude to a new insight, or that the dead period in an essay is a natural phase of incubation, is armed against discouragement. They acquire the professional attitude toward their own brain. Crucially, we must introduce the student to the experience of high-intensity mental effort. Too much of modern education is pat-ball, a gentle, low-pressure game that never tests the limits of the organism. The future thinker must know the sensation of the second wind, that flood of energy that comes only after the first layer of fatigue has been conquered. We must not be afraid to let a healthy adolescent work to the point of exhaustion on a subject that grips them, for it is in these moments of extreme extension that the capacity for sustained thought is built. This educational reform leads inevitably to a political and administrative crisis. The democratic ideal of equality has led to a standardized system of public education that treats all children as identical units. We have built a ladder of examinations by which the average child is processed into a useful citizen. But the potential creative thinker is not an average child. They are, by definition, supernormal. They diverge from the mean not by 10%, but perhaps by 5,000% in their specific capacity for abstract construction or artistic expression. The administrative solution is to recognize that justice does not mean identical treatment. It means giving every member of the community the specific nutrition they need to fulfill their function. We need the courage to establish a system of differentiation. We must identify the 1 or 2% of the population who possess the highest innate capacity for creative work, regardless of their social origin, and provide them with an education specifically designed for their needs. This does not mean a mere extension of the existing school years, which often results in boredom and the atrophy of interest. It means the creation of experimental schools where the demarcation between teaching and doing is abolished. In these schools, the atmosphere should not be that of a factory for passing examinations, but that of a studio or a laboratory. The teachers should not be mere pedagogues, but practitioners, men and women who are themselves engaged in the struggle of creation, who write books, conduct research, or paint pictures, and who share the reality of their effort with their apprentices. We must break down the guild mentality that seeks to separate the teaching profession from the world of practice. A teacher who has ceased to learn, who has ceased to create, cannot teach the art of thought, for they have lost the connection with the vital energy that drives it. Such a proposal will meet with fierce resistance. It offends the pioneer distrust of the highbrow. It offends the democratic dogma of uniformity. It offends the professional interests of the organized teaching unions, who naturally desire a closed shop and a standardized career. But if we value the production of new truth, we must be prepared to pay the price of inequality and diversity. We must be willing to spend public funds on the high-risk investment of training a few minds that may, or may not, save the future. Ultimately, the solution is moral and social. We must change our valuation of the thinking life. We must cease to regard the thinker as a queer, impractical figure, or a luxury item in a civilization devoted to material achievement. We must recognize that the unbiased, intense, and often painful labor of the mind is the most strictly practical activity in which a human being can engage. We need a new standard of intellectual conduct, a morality that regards the misuse of the mind, the acceptance of sloppy logic, the suppression of doubts, the surrender to comfortable prejudices, as a sin against the community. We must build a society that tolerates the discomfort of the new idea. Every great thought is an insurrection. It challenges the established order of habits and institutions. If we want safety, we can stick to the old ways and the old thoughts, and we shall drift comfortably into the catastrophe that awaits all organisms that fail to adapt. But if we want survival, if we want a civilization that is capable of mastering the terrifying powers it has unleashed, we must cultivate the art of thought with the same passion and the same scientific rigor that we have applied to the art of engineering. We must give the goddess Psyche her place beside the goddess Reason, and learn to govern the kingdom of the mind.